The numbers are dropping down now.
Yeah.
Right. Oops. Oh. Turn that on. Are we ready to go? So we'll hand over to you, Wally, to
Ka pai. Bridget, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, te whānau o Otago rawa ko Aotearoa, New Zealand. I have been given the honour of opening this presentation up, and I am really, I really feel honoured to be here and to open this up for us all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up with karakia, then I'm going to speak a little bit about myself, pepiha, and then I'm going to do a short mihi whakatau, which is a welcome, just to get the vibes running and get the feel goods going on. And then I'm going to pass it over to Bridget. So I'll start with karakia. Kukua te wairua, kia rere, ki taumata. Hai arahi, i a tātou mahi. Me tā tātou whai i ngā tikanga a rātou mā, kia mau, kia ita, kia kore, ia i ngaro, kia pupuri, kia whakamaua, kia tina, tina, kia taikia. Allow one's spirit to exercise its potential, to guide us in our work, as well as in our pursuit of our ancestral traditions. Take hold and preserve it. Ensure it is never lost. Hold fast, secure it. Draw together, affirm. Kia ora. He pepiha. Te parata, te rangatira. Kahutia nui te whaia tūpuna. Mamaru te waka. Manga taniwha te maunga. Mangata ore ore te awa. Te tai tokerau te whenua. Nā pū, rawa ko Ngāti Kahu te iwi. Te pāpu, te hapu, te pāpu, te marae. Ko wali tōku ingoa. My ancestors, te parata and kahutia nui, left the shores of Hawaii on their waka mamaru, in search of the new beginnings and adventure. They eventually found their way into the mouth of the Hokianga Harbour in the far north, Aotearoa. From there, my ancestors settled in the region of Te Tai Tokerau, which is Northland, creating our community in clusters of hapu and iwi. I am here today, Wali Noble, as a product of that adventure. Kia ora. Mihi whakatau. Tēnā koutou katoa, he mihi mahana tēnei ki a koutou kua hui hui mai nei i raro i te maru o te whare wānanga o tāku. Nā mihi nui ki te mana whenua o tēnei rohe. Ki ngā tangata whenua o tākou e pupuri ana i ngā tikanga o tēnei wahi tapu me te whawhai hoki ki te tiriti o Waitangi hei tūhinga whakatū o te o tātou motu. Kia nui ngā akonga ka puta i tēnei rā. Kia mau te mana he pau mō ngā mātauranga ka tukana ki e tahi atu. Nō reira, aku rangatira a tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. I extend a warm welcome to everyone gathered here today under the shelter of the University of Otago and Aotearoa. Acknowledgements to the mana whenua of this region, to the people of Otago, who uphold the traditions of this sacred place and acknowledge Te Tiriti o Waitangi as our founding document. May our learnings be plentiful, may our mana underpin our knowledge that we share with others on this day. To my respected gathering, greetings, greetings, greetings to us all. I am also a proud Māori disabled person, and I support disabled communities through the mahi I do with the Donald Beasley Institute team. From that, I will pass you on to this beautiful woman here, Bridget, to carry on with our kōrero. Ka pai.
Ka mihi, ki Wally. Kia ora for that. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming us all here today and settling us into the space so beautifully, as usual. Kia ora koutou katoa to everyone here. Ko Bridget Murfin-Beach, toka wikawa. My name is Bridget Murfin-Beach. Many of you will know me as Kairuku Mātua or Director of the Donald Beasley Institute. But today I'm here in another role, and that is one of the 3 or 4 co-chairs of Otago Whakaihu Waka University of Otago Critical Disability Studies Network. So that is a mouthful, but we are a rōpū who have an interest and a commitment to making sure disability matters within the university and more broadly, and for connecting with our communities, whether in whatever shape or form that community is. So while the Critical Disability Studies Network has been going for quite a long time, last year was the first year we ran the Networking November Seminar Series, and we were really overwhelmed and so thankful with the interest and the attendance, both online and in person. And it confirmed to us the extent of the interest in critical disability studies and disability research in all its forms. So here we are again, offering our 4 Fridays in November seminar series. And it's been a little bit of a hectic thing to plan. And I thank my fellow organisers who are here today. But thank you all for being here, regardless of whether you're attending in person, which we underestimated in terms of the room, or via Zoom. And we all hope, though, however you're here, you feel the warmth of our community and the benefits of coming together to learn from and with each other. We don't get a lot of a chance to do that. And that is what the series is all about. We would just like to say we have our wonderful interpreters here. If there is any problem with accessibility in that regard, please let us know via the chat as we go. It's a little bit hard to get things exactly right first time out. The room's not one that we're used to, etc. And if there are any other accessibility issues, please let us know and we will try and iron them out as we go. So as you all will have gathered, the theme of our series this year is Finding and Holding Hope in Neoliberal Times. We chose this theme in recognition of the challenging times and circumstances that are facing many, and particularly impacting disabled people. And over the course of the series, we hope to highlight the challenges, explore theories and approaches that can work to mitigate them, and to reignite our hope for the future. Today we have 4 wonderful speakers. Professor Ruth Fitzgerald, who we have to thank in very large part for us being able to hold this event today. So thank you, Ruth. I know it's been a challenge. Áine Kelly-Costello, Umi Asaka, who we also have to thank in large part for the series today, and Yuho Asaka, who has joined us all the way from Japan, and it's such an honour to have you here, Yuho. Collectively, they will theorise and provide us with strategies to challenge and to think differently in these times. And I want to thank all of our speakers today in advance for sharing their time and their expertise. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Professor Ruth Fitzgerald. Ruth is an exceptional teacher someone who has just been honoured for her wonderful supervision, postgraduate supervision, and a researcher who specialises in anthropology of health and medicine, with a specific focus on ideologies in health, practices of care, and moral reasoning in health dilemmas. And clinical anthropology, to name just a few. Ruth is also an expert on qualitative research methods, including ethnography, grounded theory, narrative theory, media analysis, and embodiment, and has a long-standing interest and experience in interdisciplinary research collaborations between science and humanities. And Ruth has really taken on and committed to the Disability Studies Network, and as I said earlier, very much made this possible to run this series again this year. So thank you, Ruth. In Ruth's presentation today, she's going to take us on a journey about hoping through a neoliberal system of care. So over to you.
Thank you. Roberto, it's lovely to be here. Thank you, Wally, for guiding us and giving us a great place to start from in our discussions, and thanks for the introductions too. I'm working as a medical anthropologist in the social anthropology program here at Otago, and my talk today uses a type of an analytical tool called autoethnography. So I'm doing the work of an anthropologist, going around and talking and thinking, interviewing people, but I'm interviewing myself. So I'm using myself as the raw data that I'm trying to look backwards through my life to see broader messages there about the social and cultural worlds that we live in, and particularly what it's like to live with neoliberal healthcare systems. So what I wanted to do in each slide, I just take a little element of things that I'm interested in, and I unpack them. And I'm hoping now in this seminar series to hear a lot of you speaking in a variety of ways about hope. I picked this particular reading from one of the readings I give my classes, and it's at the bottom of this slide. It's by Eves and a lot of other colleagues, and it talks about hope as a way of navigating paradoxes between hope and despair in chronic pain. And I'm a new arrival in the world of chronic pain, and I know in disability communities sometimes as researchers get older and they start to have some issues with their mobility and things, you're always kind of welcoming us. We're right at the end of the party, but you still let us stay, so thank you. I'm acknowledging that. And I think by joining the literature from chronic illness and chronic pain and medical anthropology back into critical disability studies, there's some things that we can do that are quite interesting theoretically. So that's what I'm wanting to talk about. This particular reading talks about people living their lives with temporomandibular joint pain that's unexplained, and it's a very difficult thing to manage. And in it, the authors go in wondering, what must it be like to live in this world? And they come out quite surprised that it's a hopeful place, but that hope and the way that people use that word is very multifaceted. It also changes, even in the 15 months that the people were contributing to this study. How they spoke about hope at the beginning was not how they spoke about it at the end. And so I think this gives us in disability communities a chance to think much more carefully and thoughtfully about how we're using that word, particularly that it's not just something like a placebo, something to take our mind off a bad issue. Actually, it does a lot of different things. For example, in this study, it's a way of making meaning of our worlds and who we are, and relating our experience of our body and back into our sense of ourself through the whole life course. And people changed the narratives that they used to describe what it was like to live with this pain, and hope figured very differently in all those narratives. It's also this existential state that we face out towards the world from, and we do this in very different ways depending upon our contexts. It's a labour. It's something that's an enormous amount of work to engage in, and I'll give you some examples of that in a few more slides. But it's inherently paradoxical. We're always using hope against this other alternative of potentially despair. Also, it isn't only ourselves who hope, but it's also the broader systems like biomedicine and big pharma are very big institutional bodies that thrive and promote certain types of hope, and ask us to hope along those particular lines and not in other ways. And they can make money from us, and we contribute to that. And sometimes we contribute very willingly. A lot of us enjoy a connection with Dr. Google, and we love that automatic payment for something that sounds good just at the moment on a 2 a.m. It's a good thing to maybe buy that resource. It's also a type of tacit knowledge, and that is knowledge that isn't always validated in academic communities, but it's the knowledge that comes from living through something. I know feminist theorists don't always have a great relationship with disability community and also with disability studies in general, but feminist standpoint theory is one example of tacit knowledge, okay? It's about living your life to come to a truth, and that your life is enough, it's sufficient to be the proof of what it is that you're arguing. And the other thing as an anthropologist I bring in here is that there are culturally specific ways of feeling hope. So I'm just giving you my position as a working class Australian woman on what I've learned about how I was taught to feel about hope. And that's definitely teetering between hope and despair. It's okay to be quite emotional in Australian working class societies, but it's still, you've got to be pretty rational. You've got to have the sense that everybody is believing your story. They're going along with you. And so if you're doing that too much, people will think you're putting on too much effort. They won't like you as much. If you're not showing enough hope, they'll be saying you're moping around, you're not doing enough. So there's this very judgmental quality in the culture that I came from about how you live with the expectation of hopes. And certainly as a working class woman moving through hospital systems, I've also always had the sense that there's bigger, broader guidelines on how clinical staff expect me to be hopeful, and are quite offended actually if I'm not hopeful enough after what sometimes doesn't seem to have been a very satisfying consultation with them. All right, so let's move on. That's just one little thing. Now I'm going to take you in a different path. I'm introducing you to another anthropologist from Australia, Lebanese Australian anthropologist Ghassan Hage. His work is about another type of hope, contingent hope. So that's hope that you're lucky if it lands your way. And it's operating through a bureaucracy, which is like this magical sieve. And it's sifting out certain people and saying, oh, okay, yes, you're going to get some hope here. And yes, that case looks hopeful. And that seems hopeful. The rest of you, no, I'm not looking at you. He came to this realization through studying what it was like to be a migrant or somebody particularly from a former refugee background trying to gain citizenship in Australia, and how the nation state in Australia was very exclusionary towards some sorts of people, depending on how they walked, on how they looked, on how they talked, what their background was. It sifted them out and said they're not worthy. These people don't know how to wait, for example. They jump the queue. They're not grateful enough. And so he starts to unpack something that I think is really useful for us in this broader area of critical disability studies, because he's suggesting that waiting is this practice of hope. That bureaucracy pushes into these waiting positions, and sometimes we're just so darn grateful that we just think, okay, this is it, I'm doing the work. If I keep hoping, if I keep sitting in this queue, everything is going to come out all right for me. And of course, he has many stories from people being denied citizenship in Australia that show this is not realistic, that actually we need to understand bureaucracies as sieves that sort out the worthy and the unworthy according to their own mysterious criteria. His big element that I like to take on for us to work with is his idea that just to wait is absolutely a passive state, and we need to get much more political about it, and that we need to definitely be rude, to jump the queue, to not be performing the way other people expect us to cause upset and disruption. And it's only then that we can start to bind together and see there are other people waiting in other queues, and there's a potential way that we could align together and move ourselves forward. So I see he gives us actually a gift of hope in actually not being hopeful that we're in a good queue. Okay, we've got to reject that queue. All right. If I ever run into Gassan Hage, you'll probably say I didn't say any of that, but that's my reading of Gassan Hage. So I think we do need to do a little bit of that. So now I'd like to go to another part of my life, and this is a lovely piece of writing from Katie Longmuir, a PhD student. I was very lucky to be involved in supervising a small portion of her thesis. And Katie worked for a couple of years with members of New Zealand's Duchenne muscular dystrophy community. And her research question for that community was something they asked her to research: what makes a good life? I think that Kate's work, or Longmuir, I'll give her an academic name, Longmuir. Longmuir's work is important because it's a sort of a case study of how that work of hoping is a way to value people and their lives. It's a very important piece of work that we have to do. So I think you're all fairly familiar with that different type of ordinary humanness that is Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's an inherited condition that affects men more so than women. The big reason why this community group wanted to talk about a good life and hope is because many people outside of their community read them, like the look of them, the way they are, and the fact that their lives are on average shorter than most people's in the population. They say that that's hopeless, and they create this very homogenized view that this is a dreadful situation to be in. And of course, it's not, as you know, the people living in these communities, that's just people living their lives just like we're all living our lives too, and if we're in or outside of that community. So for them, it was really important to recognize that they did a lot of work turning around this image of how they were being treated in every place that they went to, cast them in a particular mold, and they had to work to do the hope to get out of that mold. So remember I showed you earlier on a couple of different ways you could sort of divide out the types of hope theoretically. Her thesis looks at paradoxical hope particularly. And this is how the way in which all of these young men she was speaking to were really cherished by their families and their friends. But they were systematically marginalised and undervalued by the healthcare system. At the same time, though, as well as doing that work to hold up their mana when they were going into these environments that was pretty toxic, they also still had to hope in biomedicine, because around the time she was doing her study, a new drug had been released that did offer some relief for some of the symptoms of their situation. And so there was this way you had to manage both. You had to be a bigger person than the system and also learn how to live within the system too. And it was quite complicated work. It was paradoxical. The other type of hope that her PhD really revealed is existential hope, you know, that way in which we manifest our hope outwards from an embodied position out to the world. That means then that hope can be, in any particular scenario, very differently understood by all the people from their points of view within it. And the example that she gives in this article that I've got down at the bottom is when people were introduced, young men were introduced to motorised wheelchairs for the first time. And the men that she was speaking to were really very delighted sportsmen who wanted to be able to play motorised wheelchair sports, and they wanted a particular sort of wheelchair that could let them compete really actively. It was very expensive, but it created a sense of well-being, and they were very happy to see it. At the same time as she spoke to these young men as well, she spoke to their family members, and some of the family members were very saddened to see the men moving to a motorised wheelchair, because they saw it as marking a point in their lives, you know, that they were hoping might be delayed a little later. And so here are two people in very intimate circumstances looking at one particular object and seeing it and hoping through it in very different ways. And so this was something that all of the families got very accomplished at managing these different existential experiences of hope. And I just end on another example from that writing that talks about the work of hope. And you can just read that quote here, but this is one of the more disturbing elements of Katie's thesis, that people in these communities managed themselves perfectly okay, and they knew how to do this. Their families and their friends knew how to do it well, one of the scariest places to go to was actually a hospital where people didn't have that knowledge and didn't have that skill. And there are a couple of what we could only call really near misses in nearly losing a person through just being placed in a hospital where at the time the government was reducing funding for the carers and not allowing them to accompany people into the hospital. They were allowed to have a carer at home, but they couldn't take them into the ward. And this was very disturbing. So it's a huge amount of work that people are doing to gear yourself up to go into an environment that's actually risking your life. If you go there, you have to weigh it up very carefully. I also wanted to go to another part of my life, which is when I was a young PhD student myself. Well, I wasn't young, I was an older PhD student, but compared to now, I was definitely young. And I was looking at the neoliberal health reforms as they were unfolding in New Zealand hospitals. I was working as a healthcare worker. And so I just wanted to say, you know, Longmuir's study that I just spoke about really gives us very little hope that the bureaucracy of healthcare is able to welcome us. But yet I do feel there's this potential that it can. And from my own work, I think it's that when people try to work within it to offer person-centered care or just care, what that means. But the problem is that, you know, 30 years of neoliberal reform, in inverted commas, has changed the meaning of care. And I just wanted to give you a little vignette from my own life that shows that. So when I was only 17 or 18, I started work in a hospital in Australia learning oncology. And I remember having to wash people down when they were going for treatment for cancer, for breast cancer, with I had a little set of tools because the people weren't allowed to wash themselves. And so I also had to bandage any wounds that they had. And that was something that had to be done to make people feel comfortable. And I remember on Friday afternoon saying to my charge radiographer, "Oh, Miss Pettigrew, I'm sorry, but I forgot to wash that lady." And she said, "Cadet," because I was called a cadet, "Cadet Fitzgerald, you run and get that lady back and make sure she has her wash, make sure she's got bandages, make sure she's looked after." And I ran like hell because Miss Pettigrew was really scary. I went up the hill. And okay, so that's in the 1970s, right? So now to 1990s, and I come to Dunedin Hospital and I'm in charge of the area that's doing that sort of treatment. And I'm working in one of the rooms with a young mother who is really struggling, I can see, to care for herself. Money is really tight and she needs a dressing that's a very expensive dressing to reduce the odour of her wound and to make her feel comfortable. And I know that she can't afford to change it or buy it at the chemist on the weekend. So I'm standing there with the lady right beside me and I'm saying, "Oh, look, it's great. I found a cupboard and it's got some in it," pulling it out. And I can hear the manager just coming down. We had a supervised way of looking at us because it was a radiation area. So somebody that was filming us all the time. I could hear somebody's clip-clop of their high heels. The only person wearing high heels is the manager because she doesn't walk very far. And I just grabbed the bandages and I put them behind my back. And fortunately, the patient was really smart and she started grabbing them from behind my back and putting them. And the manager walked around and look, we must have looked as guilty as all hell. And she just looked at us and she said, "What are you doing?" "I'm nothing," you know. And she just kind of stared back. And afterwards, that's when I went to do my PhD because I thought, oh my gosh, 30 years before, I got yelled at because I didn't give the woman bandages. And I'm just getting really intimidated by somebody because they think I'm giving someone bandages. So that's something I can share with you, that we need to really unpack what neoliberalism has done to us in 30 years. And our basic core perceptions of things like hope and care are changing. Okay. I'm nearly at an end, I think. Yeah.
You took more time getting started, Ruth.
Okay. So now I'm just going to offer another theoretical tool from another thing I do, because one of the things that I do in my current job is that I teach. I teach new carers, people in first-year health sciences, and I teach them about person-centered care. And it struck me that I'm complicit in neoliberalism. I'm teaching these people how to care, and they're going out into environments where I think that they won't have the time to care or the money to. Okay, and so it's, what do I do about that? And so this has placed me in a moral quandary. So I'm starting to pick my way out of it. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is this idea of cruel optimism. Cruel optimism comes from a critical high theory book by Berlant, which is quite hard to read, but it's talking about the idea that in the 20th century in particular, we've come to love things that really hurt us and constrain our freedoms. Like we love the nuclear family, even though we worry about women's roles within it, or how it constrains both men and women into very narrow ideals of what family formation might be, and doesn't let us have a variety of ways to be families. It might be that we love to smoke because it's easing our anxiety, and yet it hurts us as well, and we have to manage that. So Berlant calls this cruel optimism, and I think it's a really useful tool that we should be looking at a bit more in critical disability studies. Gourdet is another theorist who picked it up just very recently and applied that idea of loving the thing that hurts you into personal health and fitness programs, and also public health programs to increase your mobility. And she said, actually, these programs make us feel terrible about ourselves because they don't understand that not all of us are really good at sports, that not all of us move in the same way, that not all of us have enough money to do this thing of movement, or the time to do it. And so Gourdet says this is cruel optimism. The public health program is saying, yes, do this, be fit, be healthy, it's in your grasp. Or your Fitbit app is telling you, do 10,000 steps. Nobody knows why it's 10,000, but it's a catchy number. So do them, you know. But actually it's not helping us to manage the actual inequalities in our situations in life. And it's forcing us to really not even pay much attention to them, but to place it all on ourselves, okay? So I think Nicholas Rose talks about this as responsibilization, but I like this idea of cruel optimism. It just catches it for me. Because for me, the reason I got into all of this is I'm about to become a pensioner, and I can't afford to have the thing that eases my pain anymore. When I'm on the pension, I won't be able to afford it. And so it's physical movement. That's the thing that helps me the best. And I go to the gym now, and I learn my exercises, and I pay my money. But I know in a couple of years I won't have it, and I still hope that I can fix it. I hope I can do it. So here I am hoping with all this stuff that I know about hope, and I'm still doing it as well. And so I think it's something that we need to unpick carefully, and it could be useful for us. I think that Paige's work is really useful for us to move forward. Thinking about hope as in this political way, that we should deconstruct what the bureaucracy of healthcare provision is for us, and see where there's potential for us to move and to perhaps liberate ourselves and work together to help each other. So thank you for listening. This is an invitation for you all. We're going to make a special issue of a journal on our seminar work today, and for the whole series. So I really like any of you, presenters, audience members, community members, if you have had an idea that you would like to write about, please send it to me. We can arrange a variety of formats. It could be an academic journal if you want. It could be an academic thing, but it could also be reflections on your life. It just might be some comments or an example, but I will find a way that we can work together to get this published.
Excellent. Thank you, Ruth. Amazing. Just need to check the time. We're right on time. I am a terrible timekeeper, but you got there exactly on time. So we've got a few minutes for.
You want the door open or closed?
You can close now, probably, Lee. Thank you. We've got a few minutes for questions or discussion. If people have any questions, they can put them in the chat. Umi, can I just check you can access the chat? Okay, that is great.
I really liked it. I just think there's a intergenerational misunderstanding of neoliberalism. I think we're lucky being older. I lived in a time before Roger Douglas and Ruth Richardson destroyed the working class. One whole fifth of the Māori workforce was wiped away and our neoliberal reforms, and we're still suffering the consequences. I'm sort of around about involved in care. My husband had a stroke 12 years ago, and neoliberalism saw me, being his wife, as the free caregiver perpetually for 12 years. And he was of no use anymore because he could either choose to work himself to death, and actually the stroke actually stopped him from working himself to death. But then there's all those economies and things of care falling on women and on whānau and on families, and then the person being cared for is like over there hoping that somebody's going to look after and care for them. Yeah, it's not very nice. And it's getting worse. Yeah. So that community and whānau responsibility is just all put on the individual now. We used to see ourselves as part of communities. It didn't matter if you're a Māori or Pākehā, we had communities, we had housing, so that could provide a base infrastructure to make sure that you were provided and could get access to care. And good luck on your gym. I'm a recent gym. I've really liked it, but then there's that whole new fascist mentality, is that you're responsible for your health, and if you don't work out, you're a burden to society. Yeah. And that attitude is becoming more and more prevalent.
Yeah. Just something just thinking about how neoliberalism has responsibilised the individual and the individual family, and has undone a lot of community things that were available even in the 80s, 90s. So like adult education is just what I've been reflecting on lately, is that we used to have so much adult education where you could go to meet with other people and learn together. And what I've been thinking about is we're going to need to go back to some of more of that community-based education, and trade unions used to offer WEA, things like that, and feminist education, feminist health education. In the 80s, there I was doing like Our Bodies Ourselves, collective of women, exploring our own bodies and our health together to educate ourselves, and that's still a huge lack that's we haven't progressed, even though they think they're progressing. So we may need to go back to that, and so places like this forum is really important.
Thank you. Is there anything online, Umi?
I feel like the community is just like, well, it's like making the gym the community. You have to pay to enter these communities more than just you can show up and it's there and it's so good.
Sweetie?
And they become exclusive to those that can pay for them, and privileged people.
Thank you. I think that's our 5-minute slot for discussion, but thank you, Ruth, as usual. Absolutely thought-provoking, and we always get the theory from you, and but explained in such an accessible and really useful way. And I was watching people's responses and reactions as you were talking, and there's lots of nodding and smiling at times, and it was really speaking to people. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Bridget.
And we will just have about a 30-second swap over break for Áine and Umi, or are you going to stay where you are there?
Can we be heard here? People online, like, can you hear us?
I think
That's okay.
putting their thumbs up.
Great. We know the sort of the setup's not perfect, but we'll keep refining.
We're just having some trouble to get rid of
the other side.
Okay. So I stay here.
Yeah, it's just please.
Or up here.
No, it's just I can't close it here.
Yeah, I think
Oh, thank you. You're good at that stuff. You sure?
Okay. And if anyone has seen me rudely using my phone, as I'm messaging Umi across the room to go, is the chat working, or whatever else we need to know.
No, you're figuring out your weekend photos.
Yes, go for it. So, just to note that we'll have a break for 5 minutes after Umi and Áine, and then before Yuho speaks at the end of our session today. So after having had that wonderful opportunity to theorise with Ruth, we now have the opportunity to learn from Áine Kelly-Costello and Umi Asaka, who have been working to dismantle ableist immigration policy. Áine is a well-known, to many of you that will be here today, disabled activist, advocate and writer in Aotearoa and internationally. They're also a PhD student that I am very fortunate to supervise. Umi is also a well-known disabled activist, advocate and writer in Aotearoa and further afield, and I'm fortunate to be her boss. So together they seem to be able to move mountains. And today their presentation is titled Valued Human Beings, Not Expensive Burdens, Organising to Dismantle Ableist Immigration Policy. Over to you both. Thank you.
Tēnā koe, Bridget. Tēnā rā tātou katoa. No airana, no kotirana tōku whānau, I tipu ake au ki airana ki kanata ki Aotearoa. I tai mai au ki Aotearoa I te tai rua mano mawha. He tangata tiriti ahau, he tangata whakahahu ko Áine tōku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone. So my family are Irish and Scottish. I lived in Ireland, Canada. When I was little, came to Aotearoa in 2004 as an immigrant. I'm tangata tiriti, a disabled person. My name's Áine, and yeah, just want to acknowledge Ruth, Umi, and Bridget, and anybody else who pulled this series together. Really appreciate the chance to present. And yeah, there's lots of good resonances with Ruth's presentation following on for us, which we'll try to weave in as we go. So I'm an organizer with Migrants Against the Acceptable Standard of Health Aotearoa, or MASHA for short, and very privileged to be here with my good friend and fellow organizer Umi, who will start us off.
Kia ora Áine, tēnā koutou katoa, he uria hono hapani, ko Yuho raua he take oku mātua, he tangata tiriti aho, ko Umi Asaka tōku ikoa. And thank you all for joining us at this seminar series, and thank you very much for the organizing with me, Ruth and Bridget and Lee. And thank you so much for being here with me in person today, Áine. So it's a privilege to be here with you all. So today, as Bridget and Áine introduced, we are going to share with you some of the organizing that we do at the MASHA. But before we get into what we do, we just wanted to start by providing some context about how our advocacy started. So it's really important to acknowledge that in Aotearoa, New Zealand, disability has originally been understood as something of a value within the context of whānau, within Te Ao Māori. And so impairment and disability wasn't always being discriminated against or seen as a devalued thing in society. However, through colonization, disability has started to be seen as a deficit or in need of cure or charity, and that something disabled people needed to be fixed, or people needed to be supported by those good-hearted people. And some of the way it has been more systemically discriminated has been introduced through immigration policies in 1870s or 1882. A new Immigration Act was introduced, which imposed levy on those ship captains who brought people with impairments or migrants who were, in quotation, crippled, idiots, or lunatic, or infirm, or blind, deaf, and dumb. And so this was the start of disability being seen as a deficit or something that was a burden on the society. That was the reason behind why those captains had to pay their levy. And these practices were not only imposed on migrants, but society started to establish institutions or psychiatric hospitals and mental health hospitals where many disabled people, especially people with learning disabilities and mental health conditions, were forced to live in these large institutions, often away from central city or out of sight and out of mind. And those practices were underpinned by eugenics, which put white people without disabilities or mental health conditions above everyone on top of the hierarchy. And so those are some of the context that underpins the current immigration policy, which is known as acceptable standard of health requirements. And this requirement didn't always exist either, but it was introduced in the late 90s. And what it does is it applies to pretty much everyone who applies for visa to stay in New Zealand. And it restricts people who are deemed to be significant demand or cost to the health, education, or disability services, or unable to do the work or study the visa conditions that they are applying for. And they have a list of conditions within these requirements, and anyone who are part of this list automatically denied with a medical waiver, and often as a consequence is rejected to have the visa accepted. So it impacts disabled migrants or migrants with health conditions, but it also impacts families with disabled children, and many families are separated due to this visa system. And it really places huge burden on disabled people and people with health conditions to have to go through this process, because they have to provide lots of evidence to show that they are not going to be a cost to the country, or they have to prove their worth and their capability to be in the country, which can be very financially and emotionally draining process. And New Zealand is actually one of the outliers in the international countries to have this policy. So other countries that has similar policies is Australia, but Canada used to have this policy and moved away from having such a strict discrimination against people with disability and health conditions. So I will hand over to Áine to talk more about the impact of this policy.
Thanks, Umi. You actually did a pretty good job covering the slide that's about to come up. So instead, I'll just give an example of one of the families that we've been working with, because I think the impacts are illustrated quite well through it. So Prince is a mother from India who has been living in Otago in Christchurch for about a decade. And her son, Jap Sahib, came to Aotearoa when he was little, I think 7 or so. And when he was here on a visitor visa, was going through that assessment process, figured out that he had Down syndrome, and then as soon as he had a diagnosis on him, couldn't get any more visas. So he ended up having to go back to India and has been with Prince's mum looking after him. But one of the other kind of complications of that, and this has all been in public, Prince has been happy to share her story, which we really appreciate, is that Prince's, was in an arranged marriage, and her husband, who, would rather not be with, but is very violent and alcoholic and not safe for Jap Sahib to be around. And so these kinds of challenges, forcing, and this hasn't been the only family where this has happened, kids have been exposed to domestic violence that they would never have been exposed to because of this policy. And just the whole thing of, you know, parents having to grow up, kids having to grow up without their parents for like substantial parts of their childhood and teenage years, which again, multiple times, this is not uncommon, is probably one of the cruelest impacts of this policy, I would say, among many horrific things. So yeah, just so much stress, so much financial burden from the repeated specialist assessments, lawyers and immigration advisors fees if you can afford them because the processes are so lengthy, appeal fees, having to apply for more visas because the process to get the visa you're applying for is so slow that your existing visa is going to run out in the meantime, and then you try to get an interim visa, and of course that costs more money. So this stuff goes on for sometimes like a decade. People can be fighting this basically all the way, like even if you get a student visa, a work visa, whatever, that's no guarantee that you'll get residency, right? So people can be here for quite a long time fighting this across multiple visas. So yeah, just the impacts are massive. If we could move to the ideology slide, thank you. So this will be kind of I guess, it dovetails quite well with what, you know, Ruth started us off on neoliberalism. There is in general a really strong thread around, we only kind of are interested in, we being successive governments at least, not a view I share, but the interest in migrants, if they have an economic value to the country, like the economic value per se is seen as the most important type of value above anything else. And so, you know, you get migrant exploitation, all of those kinds of things that come from that narrative. And sort of on the other side of the coin, you also get migrants who are just seen to not be economically valuable and then dispensable, which is kind of where this policy fits in. So it's a very monetary based frame, and it also you know, is really assumption based, because of course a lot of people who are impacted by this policy do in fact contribute economically as well. That aside though, the core assumption underlying this, that, you know, we can measure human worth in dollars is highly capitalist, neoliberal, and is the core problem, that is the core kind of mindset that we are trying to shift in trying to say, okay, we need to abolish these acceptable standard of health criteria. So we see that everyone, you know, has intrinsic value, every human being. We contribute in different ways. We show up, we care, we're in community in all different ways, and that should never be boiled just down to money. So Marsha, just a little bit more than the next slide, thank you, about who we are. We are a collective working on both a systemic and a sort of individual/family level, campaigning to end disability and health discrimination within Aotearoa's immigration system by getting rid of the acceptable standard of health, or ASH. ASH is the short acronym requirements, along with supporting those who are impacted. And want to acknowledge that Marsha came in very large part out of the advocacy of Juliana Carvalho, who some of you may have seen in the media or know, is a disabled migrant from Brazil, an absolute powerhouse of advocacy. She had a massive battle for her to be able to stay, but in that process was absolutely determined to try and change the policy. Of course, didn't quite get there on the policy side of things, so people are still being impacted, and so now we have Marsha. And we are a small volunteer-run group, and I will hand back to Umi now to talk a little bit more in depth about our current focus areas.
Yes. On the topic of being small, if anyone on this call is interested in joining us after this seminar, feel free to contact me.
You can do a shout out about the network as well.
Yes, yes, and advertise the network. Sorry, digress. But so as Áine mentioned, we focus, our approach is mainly in two areas. And one is individual advocacy and the other is systemic advocacy. So on an individual basis, we build on relationship with those people who are impacted by this discriminatory immigration policy, and we support them through their process of fighting that policy or fighting to get their visa by strategizing with them about what we can do. And usually it takes them establishing their petition and getting their story into media. So we that connects to our systemic level advocacy as well, that we are here to change the narrative in the public about how disabled migrants are being seen, and we move away from the narrative of us being reduced down to value, dollar value, but moving to be seen as a valued human being. So we try to put this consistent messaging across our petitions, and when we support families to go to media, we also try to support them through with this consistent messaging. And so we have some trusted relationship with journalists and lawyers who are on board with the approach that we have. And we also have a really strong relationship with one of the Green Party MP, Ricardo Mendes March, who's been super supportive of our advocacy and in terms of supporting individuals, but also in terms of systemic advocacy. And we also have been working with different political parties to shift their internal party politics to move away from this policy. And currently we've been working more closely with Labour so that they can review their internal policy away from this immigration discrimination. And we have been also writing submissions both at the international level and nationally as well. So we have submitted few submissions over the past few years, including to the UN Committee on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and more recently there has been submission for the elimination of discrimination, ethnic discrimination or racism. And they specifically said that they don't cover immigration issues within the consideration of racism, but we argue that this immigration is a big part of racism, or how racism is played out. So we have created submission based on that. And then some of the submission we have done within New Zealand legislation has been around whenever immigration review comes up, but we also create submission on the topic of ash. And then I'll hand back to Áine to talk about some of the challenges we have in doing so.
Thanks, Umi. One other detail on that, kind of around why do we highlight the relationship we have with Ricardo Mendes March's office, is because at the moment the Green Party are the only party in policy that have committed to ending the ash requirements. So we would love all the other parties to join them, and we do encourage people also to reach out to their local MPs and stuff as well. But yeah, so far the Greens have been the most supportive. One of the challenges that we've experienced has been the disregard of international law by successive governments, both Labour-led and national-led governments. So as Umi mentioned, Aotearoa signed up to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or UNCRPD, as I will say. And when we submitted to the review and got recommendations back from the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that does that monitoring, we got a really clear recommendation, which I'm going to read out, hopefully slowly. Review and amend its immigration and asylum legislation and administrative rules in close consultation with and with the active involvement of organizations of persons with disabilities and migrants and refugees, to ensure that persons with disabilities do not face discrimination in any of the formalities and procedures relating to immigration and asylum, in particular as a result of the application of the acceptable standard of health requirements. So that's a very clear call for change, and the last government and this government have chosen to completely ignore it. So complete disregard of international law. Another challenge has been on the narrative front, and actually Umi pointed out as well one narrative that's not on this slide, but in the UNCERD, the Racism Convention, it basically says, well, if it applies to all nationalities, that's out of scope because it's not racism. And we were like, no. And there has been more recent good work from the Special Rapporteur around racial justice and intersectionality. So I think it's maybe a sign that the convention is not quite fit for these times, and that I think we do hope that the committee monitoring that understand the importance of looking intersectionally, because we were able to highlight through that submission, why there are disproportionate impacts on people of color as well. So just wanted to mention that. But another challenge, as is on the slide, is around sort of the xenophobic narratives that come into play here. So two kind of related narratives. Disabled migrants putting too much strain on oversubscribed services. So this government, in particular the Minister of Immigration and Education, Erica Stanford, used this narrative specifically to make the ASH criteria worse, on the basis that it's disabled migrant kids' fault that there's not enough money for education, even though she is actually the education minister as well as the immigration minister. And then in line with that, we've also seen, to be honest, and this is kind of like a tricky thing to say, because we know that it comes from a place of dire need not being met, but from within our own communities too, within the disability community, and from parents of disabled kids, talking about, public services are really so stretched already. So shouldn't we fund New Zealanders first? Don't we need to look after our own, is a phrase that we hear. And again, we would just really appreciate if we could get the shared view and the collective view that actually governments could budget differently, could introduce, I don't know, wealth tax or other forms of raising revenue, and that it would really be great not to keep scapegoating disabled migrants. Because that's actually quite hurtful when it comes within our own communities. And even when we sort of encourage people who we're supporting to please don't read the comments on the New Zealand Herald's Facebook page, but it is hurtful, even though we know what the counterpoints to these are. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. So how do we try to kind of message this stuff in a hopefully strategic way? And one of the kind of tools that we've learned around this is to kind of put our shared values up the front, and then go into the problem, and then go into ask. So I'm just going to read you out an example of that, which comes from the homepage of our website. All of us love living in Aotearoa. We share a passion for making this country a vibrant and inclusive place. But right now, the government are penalising migrants based on our disability or health status. They're upholding ableist and acceptable standard of health migration rules, which impose a price tag on us based on the cost of our conditions. The ASH rules consider us a burden instead of contributing members of our communities, workplaces, and schools. This ableism does not belong in a caring and welcoming Aotearoa. We're calling on the Minister of Immigration to #EndAshNow. Join us. And with that, I will hand back over to Umi to some promising signs that we're seeing throughout our advocacy.
Thanks, Áine. And I think when we were listening to you, Ruth, you were talking about how bureaucratic system of the shift and make people, bureaucratic system makes people hopeful by making them wait. And so our advocacy is about not waiting and be hopeful by being not waiting. And so one of the results from Juliana's petition was the they had a cross-party parliamentary select committee created a recommendation that ASH policy needed to be reviewed and then tends to take a strengths-based approach. And it's really great that it was a cross-parliamentary select committee, which means that regardless of which party they were from, they agree that this policy was discriminatory. However, unfortunately, the parliament or the government itself decided to not uphold this recommendation, and it hasn't happened yet. But it's still a sign that there is some movement within the government political level to move away from this policy. And as Áine also mentioned, that we have a strong recommendation from the UNCRPD committee, and Labour is currently internally reviewing their policy about how they position within their political party about ASH. So there are some movement within those systemic spaces to move away from the discriminatory attitude, which is a good sign. And we have also seen some successes of the individual families and migrants that we've been working with over the past years. And it has been really hopeful to see these victories because we also receive lots of messages, or we have been working with a lot of families over the years, and sometimes their situation can be very, very challenging, and it can be hard to hold on to the hope. So it's really important to remember that there has been lots of successive, a few successes on the other hand. So some this on the slide here is a screenshot of the news articles of the families who we've supported, who has won their battle to receive their visas. So as I said, every victory is a significant reminder that more is possible, and that's a sign that systemic change is necessary. And so on that note, here is our contact details if you would like to be in touch with us, and we would love to hear from you.
Should we just read that out as well?
Oh yes. So our website link is endashnow.org, and our email is also endashnow@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Umi and Áine. We've again impeccable timekeeping. We've got a couple of minutes for questions or comments before we have a quick break. Any questions from the room or the Zoom room? Nothing in the chat. Ruth?
There's Lee.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Lee.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really, really interesting. And I wish I'd known it now a few years back when Bridget and I had supervised some PhD students from India who the wife had to go back to India to have her child because of some health issues, and it was going to be too expensive here. And then they went back with their second baby, and they would allow the family in except for the disabled son, their first child. And they fought for a long time, and eventually the boy is, so the family's here in India. But when I think about those, having that disabled child here changed one of our PhD students into being so much more productive as an academic in the disability space. So it was like, it wasn't a burden on New Zealand society. He is now contributing significantly to the New Zealand society as a result of this child that he had to fight. So I was just picking up on what you're saying about, no, they're burdens to the society, but no.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, we see so frequently, like when parents can be with their kids, it makes such a big difference to both of them and to the wider community in terms of how people can have the mental space then to be able to reach out, right? So thank you.
And on the chat here, there is a question: any signs of what Labour may do in terms of the policy?
Unclear. We are following up with them. We would love them to, we would love all political parties, including Labour, you know, to commit in their election manifestos to abolishing the ash requirements. And we as a group stay quite clearly on, we want them all gone, right? In the political landscape, we know that there's probably parties who would be more comfortable with compromise positions. Our position will always be that we will keep advocating until the policy is gone for everyone. Whether it's, you know, impacting on disabled kids in the education system, or people with, so sometimes, you know, you kind of see that the CRPG more clearly speaks to the impacts on disabled people per se, and maybe not every person with a health condition may see themselves as disabled, but we're always very clear, no, we want it gone for everyone that it impacts. We don't want what I missed the name, sorry, of the Lebanese anthropologist that
Ghassan Hage.
Ghassan Hage, thank you, talked about, with this like sieve of bureaucracy that will give hope for some people and not other people, and, you know, creating those hierarchies as well. So we don't want a system where it's just seen as, yeah, okay, so we'll remove the policy for these more productive disabled people who can work a bit more or whatever. We are trying to be very clear that we won't go there, and that for us, I think it's like a way of holding on to hope that we will not give into that messaging, and that we try really hard to make sure that we take everyone along. Yeah.
I just wanted to know can you give us just one example of what you do when you're interfacing with that bureaucracy on behalf of these people and with them, how you get your successes?
So when for a temporary class visa, there is no appeal other than going through ministerial intervention, which is just directly appealing to the Associate Minister of Immigration, and then they can make a discretionary decision whether to grant visa or not. But for residence class visa, you can go to the immigration
Protection Tribunal.
Yeah, so they can assess the result from the immigration officers and make a decision that it was not a fair and ethical decision, and then make a recommendation for the families or the person to be granted visa. But sometimes it doesn't, and the IPT decision might not result in them getting visa either. So then we go on to supporting them to do the ministerial intervention through associate immigration again. And our experience is we think that when we do petition and media stories, it has often resulted in more positive outcome, and so that public pressure might be working in our favor. But
one of the things, one of the things that petitioning also does is a way for people within their own communities and their own networks to be able to say to people, this is what's going on, and to actually raise awareness within communities that we would probably never manage to reach into ourselves as a core organizing group. And another thing, we have a Facebook group, and so we try to connect up. Like, we'll often see people in quite similar situations, sometimes like freakishly so, like even from the same country or whatever, you know, facing very, very, very similar situations. And as much as we can, if people are keen to be linked up with each other, we will link people up with each other. People kind of are keen on quite different amounts of support, I guess. Some people, you can see it's a big thing, but they reached out and asked for help at all, and just a kind of minimum amount. And for other people, we keep in touch pretty regularly through like all the stages. And so, yeah, a big range, I guess, requires us to be quite, sensitive to how to work well with people, and also try to develop a reasonable knowledge of what is actually quite an intricate and complicated regulatory space. Yeah.
Thank you. Sure.
Thank you, Áine and Umi. We're running a few minutes behind, but pretty good. So we might take a quick break, 5 minutes, or do you need a little bit more? Okay, so we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for our last session of the seminar. Thanks, everyone. Okay.
See you Monday.
For people in the room, if you want a quick cup of tea, there's big
Need to remove to this.
Excellent. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us for the whole session. And we are down to our last speaker for the day, but certainly not our least speaker for the day. It's a great privilege to introduce Yuho Asaka into our session today. Yuho is a prominent Japanese disability activist who spent her entire life challenging ableism and disableism. Yuho is particularly known for her work in the independent living movement and for calling out discrimination in all its forms, including a great deal of focus on challenging forced sterilisation policies. On behalf of the network and everyone here today, thank you very much, Yuho, for being willing to share your life lessons with us, and perhaps most of all, for the gift of Umi that you have given us personally and given Aotearoa New Zealand. Welcome, Yuho, and we're all looking forward to your presentation today, which is titled Hope is Our Existence. Over to you both.
こんにちは。Hello, everybody. そう。ここの、なんていうか、ニュージーランドに従って、今度は、マオリの挨拶を二言三言はちゃんと覚えていきたいと思いますが、今日は日本語で全部失礼します。はい。
Excuse me for only speaking in Japanese and not acknowledging or starting by my own pepeha in Te Reo Maori. I will do better next time to remember Te Reo Maori.
まず最初にホープっていうこと、希望ということについて、ちょっとお話ししたいと思います。
I would like to begin by talking about hope.
全く私の人生はもう希望がないと、私はもう小さい、もう0歳から、まあ本当、そうですね、ティーンエイジャーの頃までずっと思ってました。
My life began without hope since I was born until I was a teenager.
特に0歳から2歳まで男性ホルモンの注射をされたので、全く意味がなく、障害を持つ人の体は医療のマーケットであり、何でしたっけ、生体実験の場だったと思います。
Especially when I was born until I was 2 years old, I was injected a male hormone every 2 days without any scientific backing to make my bones stronger. And I feel that the doctors used my body as part of an experiment almost to, because there was no evidence that it would work for my condition. So as somebody with disability, I feel that medical system uses our disabled body as a market and as a place of experiment.
そうそう。なので、それで少し施設にも入ったので、もう私にとっての子供時代の希望というのは、まあ家族の愛以外には全くなかったですね。
So, and after this medical treatment, I was put into an institution. And so as a young person, apart from the love I received from my family, I didn't feel any hope.
施設でもひどい扱いを受けたと思ってひどい扱いを受けました。性虐待とか、なんかこう閉じ込めて説教されるとか、数々の虐待の挙句にですね、障害を持つ人はこの社会からいない方がいいという優生思想の常識ですね。それをこう植え付けられました。特に重い障害者はです。
And in the institution, I experienced various types of abuse, including sexual abuse, and also being locked in a room and being scolded by nurses and other staff members at the institutions. And most of all, I was also planted this idea that being disabled, especially being severely disabled, is a bad thing. And that was the norm of the society. And that was the message I received inside of the institutions.
それでもう学校、いろいろ学校学校で受けた差別の歴史もいろいろあるんですが、ちょっと飛ばして、障害者運動に出会ったのが20代前後の時です。
And I will skip forward my time at the school, but I met a disability movement in my late teen and early 20s.
その中で学んだことが今の私の歴史を本当に形作っていると思います。まず、
And what I learned from this disability movement has shaped me to the person who I am today.
青い芝の会というすごい重い障害を持つ人たちのなんていうか組織に関わったというか参加したのですが、その組織の中で4つの行動綱領というのを聞きました。
I joined this disability movement, and the group was called the Green Grass Movement. Mainly people by cerebral palsy and people who had a very severe disability, and they had a 4 principles within their movement.
自分のことをまず彼らは強烈に自分が何者であるかを強烈に自覚する。これが1番目です。
The first principle is to be strongly aware and recognize who we are as a person, as a disabled person.
世の中からは何もできないとか生きてる価値がない人間なのだということを強烈に自覚するということ。
And especially to recognize that the society tells us that we are to recognize how devalued we are by the society. That society sees us as people who can't do anything.
それで2番目が強烈にその自覚にのっとって強烈に自己主張を行う。そして3番目が
and the second one is based on that recognition to strongly advocate for ourselves or to strongly express ourselves to the society.
で3番目がこの社会が言っている愛と正義は否定するという。
And the third principle is to reject the societal norm or like a charitable model of love and justice.
昨日ルースさんの待たないっていうことだと思います。
And I think I connect back to the presentation from Ruth. It's about not waiting.
それが4番目につながって、愛と正義ってあなたのためよ、待ってなさいね、みたいなね。そういうのが多いので、4番目はもう問題解決の道を選ばない。これが私が一番好きなところです。
Sometimes love and justice tells disabled people, oh, this is for goodness of you, or please wait, good things will happen. So, and the fourth principle connects to this kind of attitude that we don't wait for the solution. We don't seek solution.
だからもういつも私の人生は例えば仲間の間でも私はもう待たないし自分で問題解決の道を探してきました。
And so,
解決の道、問題を何とかしてきました。
Even among our peers, we were all quite strong individuals, and we always sought solutions among ourselves.
And 私は特にね。
By myself too.
で、そこでピアカウンセリングにも出会い、とにかく感情の解放こそが、お互いにちゃんと聞き合って感情の解放こそが、ちゃんと頭をね、変えていく力になるよということを、広げてきました。
And in the process of through my disability movement, I also met peer counseling, where I learned that expressing your emotion or liberating your emotion is a tool to gain your rational mind back, and it can be a tool where you can think clearly. And I have been able to kind of share this tool among my community.
そして辛くても泣かない方がいいのだとか、悲しくてもじっと耐えなさいとか、そういうことがどれだけ嘘かということをちゃんと聞き合うことで、お互いに学んできて、随分多くの仲間が自立をしてきたと思います。はい。
And the society tells even if things are hard, don't cry or just be strong and put up with it. But through this tool, I have been able to listen to each other's feeling about how hard things are, honestly, and by being able to express and listen to each other, I feel that we have been successful at bringing people out of institution into the community through having the space where we got to listen to how hard things are.
で、さっき言ってくださったように、ステオライズ、私たちの日本の中では1948年から96年まで、障害を持つ人は、子供を産んではいけないという、産んではいけないというか、強制不妊手術が適用されて、しかるべきという法律がありました。
And in Japan, as Brigitte mentioned in my introduction, we had a legislation that legalized forced sterilization for disabled people from 1948 to 1996.
で、彼女のことはもう産もうとは全く思ってなかったんですけど、94年に何でしたっけ、優生保護法についてカイロで発言して、この法律がどんなに差別的かを言って、もう世界中にこの法律の差別性をばらまきました。告発しました。
And in 1994, I had the opportunity to join a UN conference in Cairo in Egypt, where I got to talk about how bad this legislation is in Japan to the international audience.
でも、まるで、なんとか彼女がお腹の中で聞いていたかのように、その2年後、全く私の人生のプラン以外だったんですけど、登場してくれました。
And it was never my plan to have a child, but as if she was listening to me in my stomach at the time that she came along 2 years later.
まるでやっぱりさっきも言った問題解決の道を選ばないので、否認も全然しないで、それからあと何人も何人か恋人がいてという、本当に、こういうふうに生きなさいっていう人生では全くない人生を生きていたので、彼女がね、あなたが来て、もうちょっとゆっくりしていいよと教えてくれたのかなと思ってます。
I have led a life without having any plans. Like I said, I never sought for solutions. And so in my life, I've had many lovers, but I never used contraception either. But I never also became pregnant until I was 40. And then I think my daughter came along to tell me you can slow down.
そうなんです。なぜかっていうと、もう小さい時にレントゲンを取られすぎたので、もう絶対妊娠しないと思ってたんですね。なぜ否認をしなかったかっていうと、それで、
The reason I never used contraception is I had exposed to radiation a lot through being taken X-ray a lot of times as a child, and I thought maybe I would never have a child because of this.
So more than 1,000 or 2,000 times. Anyway, so that's why だから私そんな投げるようにしちゃった。こういうのが大嫌いだったので、2011年にはこっ
And
ちに来ました。
you can speak. And that's why I really didn't like radiation. So when we had a nuclear power stations accident in Japan in 2011, I decided to move to New Zealand.
この彼女をもう絶対ひどい思いさせたくないというのが彼女を産んでからの私のすべての希望でしたから。
After my daughter was born, my life was dedicated to protecting my daughter and not letting her be subjected to what I was subjected as a young person.
で、その頃、障害者運動の中で行動の自由を獲得するためにエレベーターを作ったんですけど、彼女が生まれてからも本当にそういうことを一生懸命し続けました。
And through the disability movement advocacy, we have been able to, we have succeeded in creating accessible public transport in Japan. And even after my daughter was born, I continued the systemic advocacy.
とにかくロビーイングもさることながら毎日使う、もう周りの人に手を貸してくださいって叫び続けて、なんというか、そして介助料もですね、手を貸してくださいっていうチラシを巻いて介助料っていうのなかったから、もうとにかくどこでも叫び続けて、ケアというものをみんながね、ちょっと考えられるように、なんというか、拡大というか教えてきました。
And
健常者社会。
as well as the lobbying or the advocacy at the government level, in the daily life, like in the daily life level, I have also been seeking for the system of care through really talking out loud every day, everywhere I go, because we never had a system of funded system of support for disabled people. So I talked to people on the street and gave them flyers to become support workers and created the system of care from the ground up by ourselves.
エレベーターもトイレもね、手貸してって叫び続けて、ヒッチハイクね、あれも言って、ヒッチハイクの歩き方をね、こう、なんていうか、階段上がったり下がったりしながら、介助者を使わない
で。The elevators or lifts in the train stations in Japan was created because we, the disabled people and wheelchair users, asked the people in the public to take them up and down the lift every day for 20 years. And as a result of these actions, they recognize the importance of creating lifts in these stations. So now we have these lifts in the station.
とんでもない高齢社会に突入したので、今私たちより使っているのはお年寄りが多いんですけど、でも私たちも私はですね、自分が作ってきたので、お年寄りや乳母車の人をかき分けて、私が作ってきたので優先させてくださいと言ってみんなをびっくりさせて譲らせています。
I surprise people by telling when people are queuing up in front of the lift, and I go tell people I created these lifts, so I take a priority. Always surprised by that.
時間がないときは
especially when I don't have time to wait.
とにかく私は障害がない人間として障害を持ってる人間として障害のない人を見るととんでもない記憶喪失の人だなと思っています。3つありますけど。
As a disabled person, when I look at able-bodied people, I think that they are people who have the memory loss. And I have 3 reasons for this.
っていうのは、私たちはすべての人が最重度障害者で生まれてくる。
As everyone, when we are born, we are severely disabled people.
おしっこもできないしね、ご飯は食べれないし、もう泣くしかない。
We can't take ourselves to the toilet. We have to be fed, and all we can do is to cry.
その泣くっていうことを忘れて、泣く大事さを忘れて、成長がいいと思って育つから、なんかこう、想像力が欠けていく。
And then, but as we grow up, we lose or we stop remembering how important it is to cry. And by moving away from crying and believing that to develop ourselves is the important thing, we stop the ability to be in touch with our emotion.
それで最後に、競争するね。もう自分の気持ちに、感情に、こう、きちんと向き合えないものだから、辛いとか苦しいとか、あと痛いとか、それで、それに対してのイマジネーションを忘れるから、もう、外からの抑圧満載に作っていって、最後にそこの中で競争し続ける。
And through moving away from our emotion and ability to really feel when things are hard or things doesn't work for us, or when we are in pain, and we become ingrained in the system, competing with each other, and to be part of the oppressive system.
だからもう私は一切、スポーツとか、競争するスポーツね、そういうのに一切興味がなくて、あと、なんか、美しいとか美しくないとかない、こう、見た感じ。ね。アピアランスっていうの。
That's why I have no interest in anything that is about competition, like sports or beauty, or anything that considers appearance, or like, yeah, is about competition.
なかなか話が合わなくて大変な時もありますが。
And sometimes that makes me not aligned to have a good conversation with many people in the public. It's a little bit challenging at times.
でもやっぱりいつも思い出すのは本当に最重度の障害を持つ友達たちのことで。
I always have my friends with who are considered to have the most severe form of disability at heart.
彼らにとっての幸せっていうのはそばにいるだけでわかるんですけど。
And I can tell by being with them, by being next to them, by just spending time with them, that their happiness is.
なんかお日様が出てくると幸せそうだし。
They are happy when the sun comes out.
じゃあお外に行こうって言うとニコニコして一緒に行けるし。
And they are happy when we get to go outside together.
まあとにかくすごくシンプルなんですね。幸せっていうのは。
And then happiness is very simple.
だからそうもっと多くのこうね健常者世界の人々が競争に興味がなくなるように日々頑張っています。
So I have my effort is now so that the non-disabled world can remember to stay away from competition and appreciate the simplicity.
はい、25分だった。ありがとうございました。
Thank you.
I was engrossed in what you were saying, Yuho, so I wasn't keeping track of the time.
感動してたから時間守ってなかった。時間を見てなかったらいいタイミングだったよ。
I think everyone would agree with me that you epitomize that saying, being unapologetically you or yourself, Yuho, and that's what I always get from your talks, that they are very genuine and real and straight to the point and get to the heart of things. We've got a few minutes for questions, if anyone has questions or comments for Yuho.
I would just like to mihi, ngā mihi, kia koutou, kia koe, he kauri koe, you're like a kauri tree. You're a chief, you're a rangatira, you made change. You're a force of nature, Yuho. I have a lot of love and admiration that you made a life for yourself and for Umi when there wasn't one. That's the history and the story of the struggle of my people, of making a life when there wasn't one, when the colonisers didn't want us to have a life. I appreciate you for being straight up with me. She's one of the very few people in my life that will tell me how it is, tell me where I'm going off and what I need to do. I lost my parents, so very much respect. You has become my mother. And it's been a joy and an honour to host you and to learn from you. And you're a living act of self-determination. Not only Indigenous people, but all human beings value and treasure that act of determining your own life on the basis of your own power. Thank you so much.
いう方の存在っていうのがね、先住民だけではなくて、世界中の人のがこう自己決定権をこう表現するっていうのがどういう意味かっていうのをすごい表現してくれてるっていうことが私を生んでこう言ってきたっていうのは、もう最初から生きる人生が認められてない、生きる私たちのような人たちが存在しないことが前提となって世の中で人生を作ってきてくれたってことにすごく感謝をしているって、それは私たち周りの人たちも同様に、存在してはいけないとされている存在がそこを存在するっていうことの大切さを教えてくれてありがとう。
ありがとうございます。私もね、言っちゃダメだってたまに言われるんだけど、言っていい？シンガさんになった時、タバコいっぱいしてたから、すぐにやめた方がいいとか、で、その次は今度痩せた方がいいとかいっぱい言って、それをちゃんと聞いてくれて、とても嬉しいです。
She says, I'm very proud of you that you've listened to what I have been saying. And sometimes my daughter tells me not to say things, but I couldn't stop myself.
That's the first time we met ね。
Even the first time I met you.
No smoking, please.
I stopped. And you said the colonizer wants to kill you. And I
タバコ吸ってたらね、先週、植民地支配者たちが殺したがってるからって言われてやめたんだ。
本当にその通り、今、キャピタリ資本主義社会は、障害を持っている人を本当に殺したいと思っていると私は感じるのね。いつもこう競争させようと、もうオリンピックで十分なのにパラリンピック作って何やってんのって私は本当に思うのね。
I feel that this capitalist society always want to kill disabled people by really forcing people to compete against each other. Even I was like, I think Olympic is enough, but the Paralympic is too much for.
パラリンピックができた時、本当に情けなさすぎて、こんなところに出る人いるのかと思ったらいっぱいいるんだよね。またびっくりした。
When Paralympic was established, I was so surprised that, oh, who is going to join this thing? But then there were so many people who joined, so I was very surprised.
だから頭の中がそうですね。重度健全者にみんななってんだなって。
And so our mind, people have internalized this mindset that we need to be like the able-bodied people, and so or the mindset of competition. So that surprises me.
そのこと私が重度健全者。
And I have recently made up a new word, which is severely able-bodied people.
それから私たちがエレベーターの前で並んでると、想像力欠如してから自分がってすごい言っちゃうわけね。
And sometimes
everybody
sometimes people even they don't have too much imagination, so even they don't need elevators, they always compete to the front of the queue to use the elevators.
That's why I have to say, stop. This is
I think those severely severely able-bodied things cost our nation a lot of money because they end up having all these total hip replacements. So they cost us a lot of money as well.
重度症健常者っていうのは国のにすごいたくさんお金をかける。
Sorry, I interrupted.
That's okay. Only one more question.
Is there time? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Yuho, for the presentation. I loved hearing your presentations as well and learning from both you and Umi. Obviously, you've been involved in activism for such a long time, like since the 1970s or before. And I'm curious whether you see particular, with the rise of neoliberalism, and with sort of, I suppose we have less, sometimes in New Zealand at least, maybe a little bit less consistent in-person disability organizing, more sort of coalition-y type stuff that comes together a little bit more on the fly, and just it feels like maybe activism is changing a bit. I'm curious what reflections you might have of how disability activism landscapes are, whether in Japan or here now in comparison to back then.
なんか70年代と比べて障害者の運動がどういうふうに変わったと思っていますか？
やっぱりおとなしくなりましたね。
I feel that everyone has become much more measured, more like toned down.
それからマニュアルにすごくシステムがマニュアル化してから、そこに従わなきゃってみんな思ってしまう感じがする。
And the system has really enforced manual, like policies and guidelines and manuals. So I feel like even the activist space people feel like they have to follow a certain policy or manuals.
だからひどいのはエレベーターがついている大学で乗ってくるから学生がもう授業時間を争って、でそこどきなさいってもう言えない学生がもう休学しちゃったっていう話をね、3、5、6年前に来てひっくり返っちゃった。
で、それはルール違反だからそうやって
言えないでしょ。だか
So
ら
that's
自分が、
one example. I recently met this young disabled person who is at the university, but she cannot get on the lift because other able-bodied students are always using the lift, and she cannot get on the lift on time to get to the lectures. And as a result, she has stopped going to university. But she feels like she cannot raise her voice.
そうだから強烈な自己主張っていうのがね、本当にどんどんちょっと失われてきてるかなと。時々みんなにも思っちゃう。
So I feel like people are losing the ability to like have an intense expression of self, and even in my daughter, I feel like she doesn't have enough of it.
大丈夫もういいな。ちょっともういいかな。
She's like, but you're okay. She says.
なんだっけ、本当にニュージーランドはどうですか？みんな静かになってないですか？
How about New Zealand? Do you feel like people have become quieter?
Yeah.
だからやっぱり権利って言っちゃうと、もうなんていうかな、また権利を法律が縛ってくるっていう、法律が作り続けるから、最近は私の個人的な意見では、ね、権利とかも言いたくない。フリーダムっていつも言いたい。
I feel, in my personal opinion, sometimes when we say rights is decided by guidelines and law and legislation, and so that it constrains us in some way. So I just want to say freedom.
フリーダム。それでこの間弁護士と喧嘩して、喧嘩にちょっと教えてあげたって。
I had a debate about this with a lawyer recently.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a short comment. So I was really inspired by the fact that Yuho has practiced everyday resistance for her life. So I think home maybe could be also interpreted as ongoing process of consists of this very informal but everyday resistance. I really appreciate it.
なんか日常的にね、ずっと抵抗してきたっていうことをすごいなって思ってて、希望っていうのはその日常的なプロセスなんだろうなって思った。
その通りです。ありがとうございます。
That's exactly right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yuho, as usual. Again, thank you so
Did
much.
you write a book?
Yeah.
Yes.
I am interpreting her book right now.
So, and thank you for your comments. I think it was a really great way to sum up our morning or our couple of hours together today. So thank you for that. And thank you, Yuho, again for inspiring that and challenging us as usual, and bringing laughter into the university space. I think my colleagues here would go, that's a really great thing to have done, if nothing else. So thank you all for being here online and in person. Maybe we might need to get a bigger room next time. And yeah, well, I'd just like to say, please keep coming, everyone. We've got 3 more amazing weeks to go, and with some really incredible speakers and diverse speakers. So thanks again, and we look forward to having you and hosting you all back over the coming month. And I'm just going to hand back to Matua Wally in the far north to close us out today. Thanks, Wally.
No worries. First of all, thank you so much. I think for the people online and for the people that didn't or that haven't commented, I think silence is a virtue, and this was so thought-provoking. All your presentations were so thought-provoking to me as a disabled man, wheelchair user. I can certainly agree with a lot of that kōrero that was going on, liberating the mind. You know, I acquired my accident. I acquired my disability in my late 30s. So I understand that. I understand what Yuho was saying regarding liberating your mind and sort of working for yourself to make a life for yourself is in the first instance. I really, yeah, I'm glad in some ways, you know, I come from a construction background. I don't agree with everything you said, Yuho. I love sport. Yeah, I really appreciate the stories that we heard today, and also you, Ruth, talking about hope. And all I'm thinking at the time is, you know, when my injury was happening for those first 3 years, there was no hope, you know. And then eventually that hope came around, and I kind of feel like that's how Yuho went through the system. Obviously a lot longer to come to liberating, but I kind of feel like I'm in that story as well. So without further ado, I'll close this off with this beautiful karakia. Kia hora, te marino, kia whakapapa, pauna mu te moana, kia tere te karo hiroki I mua I tō huarahi, haumie huie tai. May peace be widespread. May the sea glisten like greenstone. May the shimmer light guide you all on your way. Join, gather, and affirm as one. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, everyone.
See you, Áine.
See you next week, everyone.
Hey, Robbie.
Oh, well done. Thank you, interpreter. Thank you very much.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'll see you later, Scott. Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Oh, nice. I will go to.
See you. So we say TBI.